parents in one home, if at all. But it's saying, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right, just an obedience to what they say. Honor thy father and thy mother, which is the first commandment with promise. Now, honor is a different thing than obey. Honor is to bring honor to. So he's telling you that what you do is supposed to bring honor to your parents. Sometimes in doing that, it is doing things that you have been taught are right, but are not or not to do something that is not necessarily wrong, the appearance of evil or whatever, or that it may be. But you're supposed to honor them. It's the first commandment with promise. There is a semicolon there, which is restating the promise. And the promise, if you and obey your parents, and obey your parents, or honor thy father and thy mother, is that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. So the promise of God was, if you would obey and honor, then it may be well with thee. You will have His blessing. We're actually going to be talking a little bit about this in a way tonight also, if I get a chance to get to it. So good question. What? Live stream's up. Hello, everyone out there. Thank you for tuning in today. Right. Yes. It's talking a very specific age of no. It's not in there. But yeah. If you consider that in the Old Testament, when the fifth commandment was given, this is basically restating, if you did not obey that commandment, children were literally stoned. Fasting didn't happen. And your days obviously were shortened quite a bit if you're in that mode. So basically, I'm not sure. What are you having problems? Does that explain enough to where you're? Yeah. Okay. You have further questions on that? Love to talk to you on that. Anyone else? Prayer request? Question? Pastor, did you want to add anything to that? Good deal. Yes, please keep Pastor on the prayer list. I broke him. He's now having a hard time talking, breathing, which is why I'm up here. It said, children, obey your parents, Lord, and honor thy father and thy mother, which I thought at the time when I was running to third base, running as hard as I could was honoring, even though he was trying to tag me. And he tripped and fell on my legs and collapsed on there. And I, of course, again, you got to finish the race, so ran home while he's on the ground. And then I realized he's still on the ground. Yeah, that didn't. So anyway. It is still debatable whether he got me or not. Given the fact he was in much greater pain than I was, I will say that he got me, just to give him some peace of mind that it at least was sacrificed or something. Very good. I don't know. I was watching some President Bush clips, and some people can chuck a shoe, that's for sure. Anyway, any other questions? Prayer requests. A lot to be in prayer for. A lot of missionaries, evangelists going through things. Always exciting. I got to listen to Dad and Jonathan Skeen's conversation yesterday, and got to participate in it a little bit, and that was a good conversation to hear how they're doing. And what their plans are for the summer. It was nice to hear his voice. He's excited about summer and not having school. And pray for them as their finals and their anniversary and all of that is tied up into one. He's got a finals the day before and the day after his anniversary. So, that's probably going to be a very special day for them, full of studying and things like that. If you think about it, you keep them in prayer, send them a message on Facebook, just let them know they're loved. I know finals was hard here in the States. Can only imagine in a foreign country with all the other pressures on. Definitely going to be something to pray for them on. Any other questions or prayer requests? Yes. Haley. Keep her in prayer. God's working on her heart. She's reached out a few times. We've been talking to her. Yeah. Yep. As a lot of them are. It all comes down to a choice to do right or not. And that's something everybody's got to make a choice on. Almost thou persuadest me doesn't work. Anyone else? Yes, but definitely keep our teens, all of our teens, in your prayer. Learn their names. Get to know them as a person, what they like, what they don't like. Be the reason that if they want to stay because they get to see you on Sunday. You say they should be coming here for God. Yes, they should. You are right. They need to be coming here for God. But a lot out of that with kids is going to be coming to church because they have a friendly face. Brother, we've had more than one missionary state that they came to church because there was a guy in the church that every week would give them just a little piece of candy or a stick of gum, That's all they did. And they loved coming to church, but they got saved because of it. And then God sent them to the mission field. Be the light in that kid's life, that person they need to see. Not saying necessarily bribe them. I'm against bribery on this stuff. They do need to want it eventually, but be the person that they want to see, that they would like to see. And that goes for our church kids too. They need to be liking when they see you, not ducking and running because you've always got a task for them, or you always criticize. So keep that in mind. All right. Any other questions, prayer requests? Yes. Fast healing. We need him. Yes. I think that wouldn't fall underneath the bounds of that passage. Yes. Please pray for VBS coming up. Oh, goodness. It is coming up fast. Yes, it's coming up fast. I'm ready to cry. All right. If you're helping with VBS, my prayers are with you. I will be there with you also, but in spirit, right? I do still have to get together with Mrs. Turner and figure a day. We're going to do the craft. Are we still going to try and do a craft with a day with workers? Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And if you haven't gotten your background checks taken care of, please, if you can do it on your own, that would be helpful. If you cannot do it, I need to set a day that you guys come to the church and we're going to be there for a couple hours as we wait in line. Be there early and we can do it, but we need it done. So we can move on. All right. Any questions that see me with sometime or pastor? Yes? God's will on it, that's for sure. All right. Something else we're talking about tonight. Any other prayer requests or... Yes? What's your mom's name, Megan? Sandy. Sandy is driving down for Gloria's surgery. 6 hours. When is that? Friday? All right. Any other prayer requests or questions? Keep asking because they keep coming. All right. Isaiah. Get into the 40s and you'll be safe. In Isaiah, somewhere in the 40s, I'll get you the exact one here before too awful long. The teens have been doing a series on discipleship. I've been doing a series on discipleship on how to disciple someone for them in Sunday school. Recently, God changed my heart on that after I don't know how many lessons we did. We did multiple lessons on it. And so we've switched gears, and now we're talking about how to know the will of God in your life. And as a teenager, this is an important question, but I find that it's a valid... I'm just saying... Oh, man. Pay no attention to the man behind the wall. All right. No, and I find that as I get older, the question of God's will doesn't change, and the need to seek it. Adults move in and out of areas with their kids. The jobs take them places. People retire and move down south because it's warmer and there are hurricanes there, and that sounds like a great place to be. We've got a lot of decisions that still get made after you're a teenager. Now, I will say that most of the decisions that people make as teens will influence the rest of their life, and how they set that up their life during those years is going to determine whether they're building on a good foundation or they're going to have to shore up some places. I had to have Caleb come over to my house and John, and they had to rejoint my basement because water had come down and stayed in some places, and it has to go somewhere, and ate out all the grout. I was seeing daylight through my basement, and I'm like, that's not supposed to be there. And so they came and regrouted and had to reshore it up. And sometimes is the house safe? Sure, it's safe, but you need to, if you're going to make it longer and try to get longer and do better, you have to shore up that foundation. And in God, some of our decisions that we make as adults are all influenced by the decisions we made as teens. The job you started, I talked to one of my early van riders from when I was just a teenager myself, and she's graduated, and I'm old, and she's working a job at a place, and I was like, so how have you been? Because I haven't seen her since she was in like 5th grade. And she said that she was regretting her career path. Good news is she's probably all of 19, 20 years old, and you can make those choices. But if she doesn't alter the course, it's going to be a lot of regret. We're going to be in Isaiah chapter 45. Isaiah chapter 45. And I should get out of Ezekiel, because that is nowhere near the passage I was telling you to be in. Sort of. All right. we have a lot of stuff that happens to us. We have trials that come to our place. We have to decide, God, where are you in this situation? Where are you in that situation? And we have to be able to discern what God is trying to do in our life through all of the heartaches, through all of the joys. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that. This is God's will for a guy named Cyrus in Isaiah 45. This was actually a prophecy written long before Cyrus was ever imagined, a twinkle in his mother's eye, if you will. And he said this in verse 2, I will go before thee. Cyrus is not a Jew. Cyrus was not one of God's chosen people. But he says, I will go before thee and make up crooked places. Make the crooked places straight. I'll break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord which call thee by thy name, am the God of Israel. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for this day that you've given us, and I pray that you'd please just help us as we go into your will, Lord, that we would seek your face, we would seek what we know to be your will, and then we navigate from there. Lord, I pray that you'd bless us tonight, Lord, as we get into your word, that you'd open our eyes and our hearts, Lord, our ears, that we'd be willing to see what we're doing, that we'd be willing to look to see where you want us to go and evaluate how close our path is to your path. I pray these things in your name. Amen. All right. Isaiah 45, 2 and 3. I will go before thee. I love this promise. I love these verses. They're actually, these are strange verses in Isaiah, but these are actually verses that have come to mean a lot to me. If I had to pick a verse for my life verse, I would say it would be these two. They're very important in verses to me. God's used them in my heart. I tell you, the weird thing about it was I only read them. I mean, obviously I read them when I was reading the Bible, but I read them in a book. It was a book called Treasures of Darkness. And I read them in there. It's a story about a missionary story. And I read it we were staying down at my grandparents', right? And I read the book because it had my grandpa. My grandpa had given it to my grandma before they divorced. And he had a note in there for her, and I was like, this is awesome. You don't find these books, right? And So I picked it up. I read it one summer. We were down there for 2 weeks, so I read it. And the verses in at least one of the chapters, I couldn't tell you for sure all of them. And so that's the only time I read it. And then I came to a point in my life where I was trying to decide how in the world I was going to make a decision on what I was going to do. Right? I was like, God, I don't know what you're doing. This doesn't make sense to me. I'm rolling these huge round tables that are taller than I am across the floor because I'm working and I'm talking to God at the same time. People would think I'm crazy. I'm telling you, if they would hear me work when I was a janitor, or I would be singing, and because nothing sounds better for acoustics than empty school, right? It just vibrates off of everything. Everything's hard. And so I would sing, I would quote verses, I'd pray, and it was a great get together with Jesus time every time I worked. And so I was rolling these big, huge tables, and I'm talking to God about, I don't get what you're doing here. This doesn't make sense. And I was debating on what to do with school, on what he wanted. And he gave me these verses in my head. Now again, I never had taken time to memorize these. Okay? All I'd done was read them in my passages of time. All I'd done was read that book, and I'm assuming it was probably in that book multiple times. I've gone to my grandma's house a few times since, a lot since then. I can't find that book to save my life. No idea where it went. But God put these verses in my head. I love that. I love this passage for that. And he used it in my life. Why? What it's telling me here is Cyrus, long before he made any choices, God's saying, I'm going before you. Right? In our life, we're facing choices, sometimes as teenagers, sometimes as adults. And one thing that I can have confidence in is that God knows the end result. He knows what we're going to do. And He's already going to have been there. If it's God's will that we're going down, He is going to make a path for us. He's going to get rid of all the gates that would make it to where it's not possible. I think about missionaries deciding to go to the foreign field, and how many times different missionaries must have heard, this is just not possible. Brother Stanley, missionary to Australia, our missionary to Australia. Am I on? Okay. I don't know why, but this thing does not always sound like I am talking into it. But Brother Stanley, he was a missionary to Australia. Ended up going on a trip while he's on deputation to Ukraine. To anybody that has a general grasp of what deputation is, you don't leave full-time deputation to go anywhere other than your field, or you're going to lose support right then. It was advised not to go by spiritual leaders in his life, except for his pastor. Spiritual leaders' life told him not to go. That Christians would not understand, it would hurt him. Right? It had already taken him a couple of years to get to where he was. He wasn't very far along. He ends up going into the Ukraine. Does God's will there, because it was God's will for him to go. Obviously today we're supporting a missionary that's in Australia. Didn't make sense. But he was following God's will, and it was one point for a missionary to Australia to go to Ukraine. Brother Mark Siegbert, we support two of his brothers, followed God's will in Mexico, leaving one church plant to do another, and then to do another, and then ended up going and becoming a missionary to Mongolia, Mexico, Mongolia. Yeah, I get the connection. Become a missionary in Mongolia. The churches he starts in Mexico support him to go to Mongolia. That's exciting, right? I believe now he's a pastor in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. Years down the road after starting another work in Mongolia. Does it make sense to us? No. Nobody that looks at that is going to say, yes, that was God's will. Nobody that's just looking at it from a man standpoint, that's what God wanted. I could have told you that back when he was a teenager. God was going to have him do that. Nobody would have done that. I'm sure as Paul is underneath a pile of rocks, he could tell you, yeah, this was God's will, right? Feeling it today. God's will doesn't always result in us feeling like we've got good things going on around us. Sometimes it brings us around struggles and trials, and where people around us are thinking, this might not be God's will. Now, I'm not saying all of those authorities need to be ignored. Be careful on that. Brother Stanley did not go against his pastor. God set up our pastor for a reason. And we are supposed to use him as a spiritual beacon, if you will, a guideline. Follow me as I follow Christ. And you're supposed to follow. If you are going directly against it, it doesn't lead to good things. I know of a second man. He was an assistant into the pastor, and he felt like God might be calling him to evangelism, heard about a church that needed a pastor. So he went to look at that church and to see. He went up to his pastor and said, Pastor, I think it's God's will for me to candidate there. Pastor told him no. Assistant decided he was going to go into evangelism without pastor's approval. Today he's out of church. You don't go against. You don't go against for absolutely no spiritual reason. You say he was making spiritual decisions. Yes, he was. Unfortunately, he's making the wrong spiritual decisions. He gives us guides in our life that we're supposed to be able to use. Too often times, you see those, it's one reason why missionaries, yes, they're still underneath a local church. Because too often times when you become your own source of And yes, pastor has his own authorities that are helping guide him and help him and strengthen him. His own iron sharpeneth iron. Because too many times when we rely on ourselves and the Word of God, we become a cesspool. That's right, a cesspool with the Word of God. Because if we have all intake and no output, and we have nothing flowing through us, we become the Dead Sea. Too many people have wandered far in their doctrine, Bible doctrine, because they didn't bounce it off of their biblical authority in their life. At the same time, we need to make sure what our authority is saying is lining up with what God's Word says. We're only supposed to follow Him as He follows Christ. So we follow it as that. God promised to go before us. He gave us His guides to help us. He made a path for us to where those things would be opened up. I'll tell you, sometimes we see a door opening and we think, that's it. And then God closes it and we're like, what in the world are you doing? Why'd you close that? That would have been so much nicer than the way we were going. You know, we see peace. But it wasn't God's will. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. We come to times often when we're in Isaiah 41, and then we'll come back. We come to times that are full of struggles and problems in our life, and we wonder if anybody can understand or knows what it's like to go through where we are. Nobody has to. That's the point of being in God's will. You're not necessarily in a person's will. You're not necessarily in that person's point of view. When you're in a struggling or an emotionally trying time, it's not time to cut ties with God and say, I'm going to try and do this my own way. I had somebody call me and tell me that they were frustrated and they didn't know if they could keep going. And I told them, good. And there was silence on the phone. What are you telling me, right? Hey, God's strength is made perfect in weakness. If you know you're weak, you can totally depend on God. If you know you're strong, there's not a dependence on God. I talked to Brother Hammett when I was in Africa with him, and I was there for like 4 or 5 weeks, and I'm like, God does something every day here. Like literally, there is not a day He doesn't do something. The first day I was there, those guys were going through Action Church history while we were there. That was one of the courses we studied in the mornings, and he was supposed to record it so that he could do the college, right? Send it to the college that is in his home church. They wanted him to record the sessions. And they forgot the mic in Philadelphia. Right? Brother Muhammad says, pray for me. I'm going out to find a mic. Yeah. Francistown is one of only 2 cities in all of Botswana. There's 2 streets in all of Francistown. That's it. And 3 million people to live there, right? It's like, what in the world? How are you going to find anything? Comes back an hour later and says, there's a guy walking with this boom mic, like Caleb has. And he said, asked him if he could buy it. He's like, sure. And he ended up buying it from a guy that it wasn't a store. God does something every day here. And I said, why doesn't this happen in the States? And you know what his answer to me was? We're weak here. He said, remember that first day? I had no idea where I was going to find that. I just was praying. You guys were praying. I know I needed it. Didn't know where it was going to be. Turns out it was in a guy's hands. Right? And God was able to take care of that need. Does God care about microphones? Yes. When it is in His will for somebody to do something, He'll make a way for it. But when we depend on ourselves, if we need a microphone here, what are we going to do? I'll run to Walmart and I'll grab it.
If we need food, what do? We go to the store and buy it. There is no dependence on God because we don't need God for everything. We set up our life around retirement. No offense to anybody retired here, but if you're wise, you're saving for later, right? That's something we're taught from an early age. It's a good thing to be wise with our money. But at the same time, if we are so wise that we have no worries, where's the dependence on God? Very easy. I think that's one reason why God does not help us more, is because we have figured it out to the penny how we are going to spend this paycheck. So why should God give us anything else? We've already got it covered. We have a total dependence on ourselves instead of a total dependence on God. So how do we expect to go through God's will when we don't even depend on Him? We don't take it to Him. That sweet hour of prayer, if you had a need that you were weak and knew that you were weak and knew that there was nothing you could do to do this, you would spend that hour in prayer. Why are our prayer lives weak? Because our Christians are dependent on ourselves instead of on God. If I asked people how many hours they spent in prayer that week, I'd tell you it'd probably be significantly less than the time they spent listening to the radio or the television. Spent more time listening to outside sources than we did to the Lord, because we are more dependent on that for information and how to handle these situations and to inform us than we are on going to God with our needs, because our needs are few. Our wants are many, but our needs are few. And so we treat God more as a genie in a bottle to try and take care of our 401k. I have a one, by the way, so I can't really tell you that that's an evil thing. I'm not here to say that. But the amount of money going into it is not going to be enough to help me unless someone's really smart on the other end of that pulling the trigger. It's not exactly going to be the saving grace on that. I was praying for God to provide for me to go on a mission trip coming up this next winter. I want to see Elizabeth again. I'd like to go over there before they come back and Philip's 4 years old. That would be a great thing, right? And I prayed, God, you need to supply it. I'm looking at my bills, I'm looking at my income, and I'm like, yeah, that's not happening before this winter. You know, there's no way I can make this happen. Lord, can you help me? Can I tell you, He's already taken care of it? He's already taken care of it. I'm months ahead of the game on this. You say, you are? No, I'm not. God had it in hand before I ever asked Him that prayer. He was going before me and taking care of it. I'm excited about that, by the way. God has a way of taking care of that. Right? But the key is I had to be dependent on Him. Isaiah 41. Verse 10, we go through problems, we go through trials, we go through issues in our life, and we don't know what to do because this is overwhelming us. And that's when I get that. I hear I have teenagers telling me, you just don't get my problems. And I get to tell them something along the lines, no, you just don't get God. Your problems are nothing. He's got it. He's seen it. He knows what you're going through. He's been and there with you the whole time, and you just have to be able to take and accept His help in that area. Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Isaiah 41, verse 10. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. That isn't Putin's secret to strength. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Not talking about anything that the person is doing. Not anything that Isaiah is doing. Not anything that Israel is doing in here. It's all on God and a dependence on Him. God's will. To be dependent on God, not on yourself. I talked to someone who is financially secure, and I asked them once, Secret. Give me. How'd you do? What did you set up doing? I'm expecting, this was my first step in getting what I have, and this is the second step. You know what they said? Every time they had problems, they gave more to missions. Every time they had problems, they gave more to missions. Financial problems, right? They don't know what to do in the business. Gave more to missions. And then God took care of the problems. You say that's the cure-all. No, it's not necessarily a cure-all. What the cure-all is, they were depending on God. They were trying to make it to where their money was definitely not going to be enough. They were making it to where their dependence was clearly on the Lord, where they're telling Him, yes, Lord, this is my sacrifice for you. Does it make sense? Not really. Not to any economic advisor. But what they were saying was, God, my life is yours. What you want me to have, I'll accept. And I'm going to give this to you because I have it. It's going to make it to where I can't do what I need to do in this. And God took care of them. God took care of them. And repeatedly, they've been able to give to the Lord and help the Lord's work in different areas because they have been able to say yes to the Lord in that area of their life. I don't think that God can trust most of us financially to do that. How do I know God's will in my life? Number one, on the way to know God's will in your life, do what you know is right. Obey Him in the areas that you know are right. He tells us, like Damien's question, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. You know that it's God's will for you to obey the authorities in your life. You know it's His will for you to honor them. So do it. God's will. My blessings. Right? You give this, you do that, and you've got God's will. Thou shalt not steal. All right, don't take anything that's not mine. That's God's will. So I'm not to take anything that would make it easier on me to follow God. You know when Saul was supposed to slay everything and brought it back, he was telling him that he knew better. In essence, you say he was going to sacrifice it for the Lord. He was stealing. He was stealing from God's will. He was taking for him. He had excuses for it. No, when God tells us something, you need to do it. If you know there's a definitive thing in God, the Bible that tells you that you are not or you are supposed to do that, you do it. Do not do those things that say thou shalt not. But you know one thing that He tells us to do, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. It's God's will for your life. Be a witness. A good witness. I get tired of Christians that think that there are Christian things and then there are economic things. There are Christian things and then there are ways to handle this world. No, those two are always intertwined. We always have to be able to put those together. Our world outside is how we are. Our life outside is how we are revealing God's light to others. So we have to always be willing to reveal that light. I love Brother Turner. He gave it to me a long time ago. And says it frequently. Somebody will come up to him, what's up? And he'll say, heaven, are you going? Right? I use that at work. I'm not allowed to talk about heaven unless they initiate the conversation. They tell me what's up, I got heaven. All right? So it's one of those things that we can do, and to be a light. To always keep in mind that we are that witness. You can do the things that you know are right. If God has told you to give something up, keep it given. Don't take it off the altar of sacrifice. Imagine that sight in the Old Testament. Somebody's like, I changed my mind. I want that lamb back. When it's offered on the altar of sacrifice, keep it. If it's something you struggle with, if it's a sin or an area you struggle with, get an accountability partner, someone that will, not necessarily someone that is still struggling with that. Someone that has conquered that and has a victory on it, and you know they have a victory in their life, or someone that has never fallen down that road that will be holding you accountable on that because it is not an area that they struggle with. Do what you know God's will is. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness, 45 verse 3. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness and the hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, has called thee by thy name, am the God of Israel. So, yes, everybody wants treasures, everybody wants riches, everybody wants God's blessing on their life. What we don't realize is that in order to get that is we have to obey. First, learn rule number 1. We have to go past the first point before we can get those things. We want to serve God so we can get those blessings. We want His power on our lives and our ministries, but we're not willing to make ourselves the point to get to the point where we have to depend on Him. Are not willing to get in our lives to the point where we have to obey in those simple things because I know that, but I'm not living it. We expect God to be appearing before us in this mirage that's like, oh, that's God's will. God's will is fairly simple if you take and do what you know what you're supposed to do. If you're struggling with tithing, how do we expect Him to call us to a mission field? If we're struggling or give us power when we go out on visitation. This is what I'm saying, folks. God's will is simple if you'll just do what you know is right. Because then He's able to tell you, yeah, that's something else. This is another area. But as soon as you say no to Him, in one of those areas that's simple, and that's you've known since you were 5, it gets harder for Him to show you because you're looking through it from a window of, no, God's will's here, and you say no here, and you're walking around it, and so all of a sudden you're heading in that direction, and His will is straight down there again. And the farther off you get in that direction, the farther off you'll be away from what His will was. He has many blessings for us. We don't serve Him for those blessings. We serve Him because He is worthy of our sacrifice. He is worthy to be praised. He's worthy of all of our efforts. There have been times when I've called or talked to my sister and I'm like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. This just doesn't make sense how this is all breaking down. And she gives me the typical sister speech. You wimp, you got a long way to go yet. She gives me that nudge of quitting isn't an option. Deviating left isn't an option. Because what God's will is, He doesn't change. Now, He gets us in a place and then He'll take us from that point to another point. But we have to stay on the path of everything that He tells us. And if it's just getting hard and that's why we think it's not God's will, re-examine what you think God's will is. Look at the examples in Acts of what our Christian and forerunners went through and tell me that they had it easy. Okay, I got to stop. I apologize. God's will. Do what you know what is right, hate in it. What you know He has set down in stone from His Word is right. Lean on Him. Get it to where it has to be God. And then be content with what He gives. Go through those struggles. Go through the good times. And just keep following as He guides you. Don't deviate in the high times and the low times just because it's good or it's bad. It's an important thing I'd tell Christians. You need to be more stable in that. In the high times, you're going to say, it's God's will for me to do this. Why don't we keep going on the path that God told us to do and not the one that we feel like we can do because we're feeling good? Had a little bit extra caffeine that day. And then watch as God takes over and gives us many blessings, ones that you'll cry over. Yeah, that was God. And you know it was God. And there's no other doubts. There's no other feeling like God's will. And there's no way to replicate it without doing what we know is right, going through those hard times and those joyous times, and then knowing, yes, I am in the will of God. There's no doubt there, no matter what anyone else tells you, because you know this is what He told me. And this is what He has said, and I'm following this. It's God's will. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, thank You for this day you've given us. Bless this time of prayer now as we get into that. Teach us Your will. I pray these things in Your name. Amen. If you'd break up into your prayer groups,